While my presentation is being loaded, my apologies, I have a cold, so I might not be as loud or might speak as I usually do. Greetings from the warm heart of Africa, Malawi, which we were hoping that there would be sun when we got here, but Monsignor, we're very saddened that there's no sun. It's very cold, but we're grateful and happy to be here. I'll do a bit of tourism before I start. I hope you all visit our country. We have a beautiful lake. It's called the Lake of Stars, but it's also called the Calendar Lake because it's 365 miles long and it's 52 miles wide at its widest, but also 12 rivers flow into it. So it's called the Calendar Lake. So come visit Malawi. Basically, what I was going to talk about is contextualize all the issues that my two colleagues have talked about and to remind ourselves as to why we continuously see human trafficking in our countries. Malawi is not special. It's still a least developed country. But one of the biggest things that we notice, the reason why we keep being trafficked, or our women and children or men keep being trafficked, is the concept that they're looking for greener pastures. And those greener pastures are always going to be there. Now, historically, our country we used to have what we called the Temporary Employment Bureau for Africa, which meant Malawians would be able to travel to South Africa, Zambia, to work in the mines and all that. And that was through a proper legislative method. That is no longer existing. And so that is also one of the reasons why we continue to see this kind of movement of people through trafficking. I also wanted to contextualize that internal trafficking for us is huge as well, especially for labor. And those are the things that we constantly are struggling with as a country. And it's more prevalent for children. There's a lot of child labor because we have a lot of estates, tobacco, tea, and those are big for us. And lastly, there's no sustained data to support most of the contentions. If we're going to talk about context, we need the evidence. And for evidence to be available, we must have data available. And most of our countries don't look at data as a big and important issue, but it's absolutely fundamental, whether you're talking from a judiciary perspective, whether you're talking from a legislative perspective for parliament, or whether you're talking from the executive perspective to get money. So all that is very contextual and very necessary for our discussion. And that's something I think as judiciaries, we usually don't look at. What is the data available to us for these cases? Because also for us, data is important. The amount of cases that are reported at police, and actually the amount of cases that come into our system. Because what is happening to those numbers that are falling off the way? We have to know what's going on and whether we are able to also assist in that particular area. So I think Mary and Fiona have talked about how much we have a robust trafficking laws in place. We've had a lot of continued sensitization in Malawi. We are still rated at tier 2, although we're tier 1 in a tier 1 country in 2005. It would be good to go back to being tier 1. And that is a significant issue for any country that's in this room. What kind of tier we're looking at? What are we? And where are we at the particular moment? And we do highlight the fact that there's a lot of prosecution of reported cases. We're happy to say that from the DPP's office to our courtrooms, cases are being prosecuted and finished. But what is it from a judiciary point of view? We, like Nigeria, have lay and professional magistrates. And most of our lay magistrates are across the country, and those are the ones that are dealing with the bulk of our cases. It's only this year that we are deploying professional magistrates into all the districts to ensure that there's supervision of those lay magistrates. But they are the ones that are handling most of our trafficking and related offenses. And as the High Court, we only handle those trafficking cases from a point of view of confirmations, reviews, and appeals. And most trafficking cases, if you look at them, and this is something that we've all agreed, they mostly dealt with as run-of-the-mill cases. So if it's a homicide, we'll deal with it as a homicide. We will not input into it the offenses that are related. You will see the prosecutor will only say murder. There would be count 2, count 3, count 4, count 5 of the other issues. And that is necessary because sometimes you are unable to find for the other offenses. But if there are particular other counts, it is very helpful. And that's something that I think from my prosecution days, I used to be with Mary in the prosecution's office, that we always made sure we had more than one count on a charge sheet. But that's something that we're missing, and that's something that as judicial officers, we cannot tell a prosecutor that what other offenses are available. But that's something we should be looking for, because that's something we could always find at the end of the day for our cases. And we wanted to also highlight that the biggest aspect for judiciary is the role of the sentencer in terms of the charge. Everyone has talked about it. A defective charge limits our ability to sentence, whether we like it or not. So courts heavily rely on prosecutors. And that's one of the reasons why I will now talk about what we've done as WOJAM. Women Judges Association of Malawi is a non-profit organization, which means we're able to source funding that government can't for training, because it will have less attachments. Because if with government, where there's political issues, they would not, like, right, there was a time that our governments could not receive money from development partners. They could only source it, they could only put it through civil society or non-profit organizations. With that, WOJAM was able to get funding to do trainings. And in that, we've managed to every time we do trainings, we do what we call a little comparative study of what is going on in our judiciaries, in our magistrates. So for the last time, we did what we call sentencing trends for our trafficking cases. We did find that there's inconsistency in sentencing, despite the law not having an option of a fine, which is a unique nature of the Malawian Trafficking Persons Act. People are still finding traffickers, but the law particularly says you should not fine. It actually says without option of a fine. And that is for whether it's a person with the 14-year sentence or the 21-year sentence for a child. It says without an option of a fine. And most cases deal with trafficking of persons for labor exploitation into neighboring countries. Those are the ones that we've been finding a lot. And they mostly the most victims are children and young, sorry, I said it should be young persons, not young offenders. It's okay. I just wanted to remind ourselves that we do have general principles of sentencing, and those are the things that we're constantly reminding our magistrates during our trainings. And that is something that I think throughout the process, you cannot forget continuing education for our magistrates, because that's something we're constantly not doing. There's not enough money for funding for our judicial training committees. We're lucky, some countries have what we call judicial training institutions. I think Nigeria has, Kenya has, but I'm not sure which other countries do. Most of us don't. So we rely on ad hoc training for that. So it's something that has to be continuously and effectively managed. So WOJAM, and I know the chapters of IWJ in the countries are quite critical for bridging this gap where there are no training institutions. So we did a select number of cases I just wanted to highlight. The case of Republic versus John Mponda, which is a 2017 case. The person was convicted of 3 counts of trafficking, contrary to the Trafficking in Persons Act, which is Section 14. Section 14 carries the maximum of 14. So he got a 5-year sentence. That was 2017. The Republic versus Saukira Said, which is another 2017 case. It was also another trafficking offense. But if you see at this one, the court imposed a 3-year imprisonment for the first term and a 5-year sentence for the second term. But they were to run concurrently. And that's one of our sentencing principles. Whether a person has 2 counts or not, as long as they were done in the same issue, it's going to be a concurrent sentence. But we have just realized, we've just been looking through our criminal procedure. We've also realized that there's a lot of latitude in our criminal procedure and evidence code that allows for consecutive sentencing. And that's something we are constantly advising our clients that, look, if the circumstances and the issues are so aggravated, don't just consider concurrent sentencing because that's just a judicial principle. It's not a statutory principle. Our statutory principle says you can give consecutive sentences as opposed to concurrent sentences. And the last case is a recent case, which is Republic versus Regina Chienda. This person was convicted of child trafficking contrary to Section 15, which carries a 21, and this person, 21 years, the court imposed 8 years imprisonment with hard labor. What I wanted to highlight that is since the last year, 2 years, the High Court holds what we call a special session of confirmations. So for any offense that carries 2 years, or any offense where a person has been fined, they get reviewed. And during our reviews, one of the things that we've highlighted, what we pay special attention to in our statistics from those confirmation processes, we handle it's like 8 judges will go away, 8 to 10 judges will go away, sit in a room for 1 week and review all those cases. Usually we do about 1,000 to 3,000 cases, depending on the workload for that month, for that quarter. We do it every quarter. And what we've realized that is the sentencing trends for trafficking have started going up after one of the judges did a kind of like a guideline for confirmation, in a confirmation issue about the sentencing. The last session was last week. I just came out from one. The biggest sentence we found from that one was actually 14 years for a child trafficking case, where there are about 5 children that were trafficked. So when we look at statistics, we realize that 62%, because of the trainings that we've been undertaking as WARJAM, but also as the judiciary, that our sentencing trends in terms of most offenses, whether it's gender-based violence, have actually started looking at the actual sentences that needed to be given. And because of that, the High Court has confirmed about 62% of those sentences, which means our magistrates are on track in terms of the sentencing that they're doing. If the mark had reached below 50, we were going to be worried. So our trend during these confirmation processes is to always look at sentencing and see if they go above the 50% mark in terms of confirmations from us. So what are the latest developments for us? We have recently enacted the national registration and birth registration laws, which you know for a fact actually do help in realizing where you are, where your human beings in the country are. And this year we also took a national registration exercise. The elements of the trafficking in persons has also come into effect, like the National Coordination Committee, their protection officers who have been appointed and are awaiting gazetting. The Secretariat for the committee, terms of reference have been drafted, and the Ministry of Home Affairs and Internal Security will be doing it. But also we are very lucky that we have a very strong civil society who are very much aware and are doing a lot of work in addressing trafficking. Like these are the ones that have been dealing with the women that have come back from the Arab states. We also have what we call the Malawi Network Against Trafficking, which was established and currently being chaired by WARJAM, but it is going to have elections, so maybe WARJAM will not be its chair after that. Let's talk about the women judges. One of the things that we do as women judges is we strategically choose topics to be our core points for 5 years. Trafficking is one of our core points for the next 5. For the last 2 years, we've got, I think, 3 more years to go with it. So all our programming work center around gender-based violence and with a focus on trafficking. WARJAM members are currently now being used as resource persons for training and policy and legislative advisory work. Currently, I think last month, Justice Fiona Mwale was in Tanzania doing this particular work on trafficking with one of our WARJAM members, our worship, as Chief Resident Magistrate. UNDP as well as Malawi, we've also done work with UNDP as well as Malawi Police Service in terms of training on issues of trafficking, locally as well as internationally. We've also carried out a number of programs, projects, and sensitization on trafficking, which have included renovating 2 courts to make them victim-friendly. We managed to get funding for 2 courts to be made victim, and these 2 courts were in border towns. We also did develop a trafficking in persons handbook for magistrates and judges. That's what we use for our training. We've done workshops, I'm sorry, that's such small font. We've had training of trainers for the WAJAM members. We've trained judges, magistrates on laws. We've trained prosecutors. We've been training victim support unit officers. We also trained investigators and community members. We do like to target our chiefs. We like to target our religious leaders because they have, if you look at the African context, if you're going to get someone, you're going to get them through religion or culture. Those are the two areas you're going to get them. So we do target those big. We also train our social welfare officers. But the biggest one we do is we do train our immigration officers. And those are the things that we targeted, we've been doing since the last 3 years. And I think even with funding from IWJ through UN Trust Fund. Our challenges, we continue to find our offenders. Immigration Act is outdated. I think Mary already talked about it. Fiona has talked about the victims are rarely considered. Forfeiture is hardly imposed, which is something that we've realized. And as long as you have a country that has high levels of literacy, there will always be knowledge gaps. And that goes to the legal literacy. If you're going to do legal literacy, your levels of literacy need to go up. My time is almost finished. I'm almost done. But the biggest issue is the lack of resources, and there's still nothing talking about that, the anti-trafficking fund. Those are what we continue to do. I think you have time to read it. But that is all from me. Thank you.